Great. So I'm going to talk about a project that I did years ago at this point that I recently took offline and then kind of use it as a way to speak to a couple of more speculative points and some open questions perhaps that can bleed into our discussion. The project that I'm presenting is called Bail Block, which was a collective project that we did under the banner of the Dark Inquiry Collective, which was kind of an offshoot of the New Inquiry. And before I kind of talk about what the project does, I have to give some context, some background about what bail is and kind of how the legal system works in the US. And I think that it's a bit different here. I've had some conversations with people in Europe, and there are some similarities, but also some idiosyncrasies, of course. So as a definition of bail, it is money or some form of property that is deposited to the court by the suspect in return for release from pretrial detention. If the suspect does not return to court, the bail is forfeited, and the suspect may possibly be brought up on charges of the crime of failure to appear. So essentially, you get charged with a crime, and you have the option of paying some money. The average bail in New York at the time was like, back when I started doing this stuff in 2017, was like $900. So if you can provide $900 to the court, you will be released from pretrial detention, meaning you can go home to your family instead of spending time in jail before your trial. And then if you show up for your trial, regardless of the outcome, you get the money back. And in a place like New York, this can mean years, actually, of pretrial detention. There was a really famous case of a kid who at the time I think was 17, who allegedly stole a backpack. His name was Khalif Browder, and he spent about 3 years awaiting trial. And he felt so helpless because he didn't have the ability to post bail that he took his own life while he was awaiting trial. And bear in mind also he'd never sat in front of a jury of his peers. Like no one had ever proven that he had done anything. And so obviously the problem with bail is that it disproportionately affects low-income people and people of color. And not only this, but you have a better chance of being found innocent if you have the ability to pay bail, even bearing in mind economic circumstances. Like those things aside, the conviction rate for people who are not detained for pretrial detention is 50%, while those who are detained during pretrial detention is 92%. In other words, if you can afford to pay bail, the chance that you're going to be found innocent is 50%. And if you cannot, your chances of proving your innocence are 8%. And again, I remind you at this time, like these are people who have yet to have their constitutionally guaranteed fair trial by a jury of their peers. They haven't been found guilty of anything, except being poor, obviously. And so then there's this system called a plea bargain that comes into play. And so basically what happens there is you're convicted of you're charged with a crime, and the district attorney basically comes to you and says, these are the people prosecuting you as the state. And they say, all right, so rather than, you facing 2 years in prison for this charge up here, how about we charge you with something a little bit less? And if you just plead guilty to that, we don't have to go through the courts. You don't have, the opportunity to be the chance of being found totally guilty for the higher crime. So maybe you just take that, and we can all kind of walk away. And and 90% of people in New York State who are offered this, who can't afford bail, take it, because if you have the opportunity to not go to jail for 2 years, but maybe go for 6 months instead, you might take that, obviously. And even with 90% of people taking a plea bargain, the courts in New York are so impacted, meaning they're so overfull, that they will take cases on Friday night at like 10 p.m. They're still hearing cases, right? And so the reality of this situation is that the legal system was not intended to give people the right to a fair trial. because it can't actually accommodate that with 90% of people not going to trial. And even with just 10% of people taking their cases to court, the courts are still so full they can barely contain this volume of people. And so clearly we have a system that was intended to not give people the right to fair trial. And so in the collective Dark Inquiry, we started to kind of ask, like, what would happen then if more people could afford bail? In other words, like, instead of 10% of people taking their cases to trial, what if it was like 15%? And I think that very clearly the courts would break under the weight of all these people claiming their constitutionally, guaranteed right to a trial. So we became very interested in kind of tipping the scale. And I have to speak to some of the influences of the project before I really get into what it is, which number one, I think, would be SETI at home. And this is one of my favorite projects of all time. SETI is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And like, before I sound like a total maniac, it's really, it's like Carl Sagan founded it. It was like part of NASA and all this stuff. The idea is that they have a satellite array in Puerto Rico, which I think was actually recently destroyed due to climate change. But the satellite array is both kind of transmitting and receiving information. So it sends out this message called the Arecibo message, which is basically like, hey, we're intelligent, and like, here are our prime numbers and stuff. And then it also, which is maybe a bad idea if you've ever read the Three-Body Problem, but and then it's also receiving information. And of course, there's all kinds of stars in the sky that are like sending information, and so they're trying to determine like what is natural and what might be unnatural, what might be like intelligent life. And so they're listening for people or beings communicating. And this requires going through an incredible amount of data, and so you need a supercomputer to kind of take that information and like crunch it and extract patterns, if there are any. So anyway, SETI runs out of money at a certain point, probably like post-Reagan, and they are in a big budget shortfall. And so the Berkeley lab, University of California, Berkeley, they come up with this idea to create software in 1999, I believe it was, called SETI at Home, which allows you to partake as a member in a distributed network of people to download some software, and they would kind of break up the data that was coming from the satellite array and send it out to everyone involved, and you would, or your computer would compute that very small piece, and then it would be kind of reconstructed by I don't know, whatever software they were running. And so like they created an ad hoc supercomputer out of 10,000, I just made that number up, but it sounds accurate, 10 to 30,000 people running the software. And this also kind of spun into various projects like Folding at Home that does protein folding and all this stuff. But I think what's really cool is like there's the technical turn that they did, this creating an ad hoc supercomputer out of a network of people's kind of latent computing power. But then there's also this thing where like the people who participate, they're not just kind of volunteers, but they're actually participants. Like they have some stake in this. If you were running that piece of software and we found aliens, you'd be like, yeah, I did that. And then the other thing I have to talk about, of course, is Bitcoin. So everyone knows what this is. When I was in graduate school in, I think 2010 or 2011, I was managing this computer lab, this digital lab for other classes. And so like, basically I thought it would be funny. It wasn't worth anything at the time. This was like not as, I don't know, it was fine what I was doing. It wasn't profit motivated. I installed Bitcoin mining software on all of the computers in the lab so that when no one was using it, it would mine Bitcoin. And I just did it because I thought it was interesting, because I was like, how do you solve this kind of problem that Bitcoin is trying to solve, which is like, the banks are the problem, the sort of like centralization of money is the problem. And so the way that they kind of tackle this is that everyone has to partake in the upkeep of the network, and that happens through the mining process, which we'll get into more in a second. And so I was just kind of doing it as a way to learn about that. And I mined like 2 Bitcoin, and then like it all went away. I like lost all of it, so I'm not rich or anything. And this was back when it was worth like $10 or something. But it did kind of stick out in my mind as like an interesting way to generate money out of thin air. And so the kind of general idea with mining is that you're trying to replace the work that's done by banks, which is like issuing checks and like making sure that when you try to send money from person A to person B that it gets there. And so you have to automate that using software, and you can kind of elect to put your computer to the task of doing this, and it's called mining. It sort of verifies transactions on the network. And this is incentivized in the sense that they then give you a kind of a kickback, like a little bit of Bitcoin in return for lending your computing power to the network. And there's all kinds of stuff to say about this. It's kind of a lottery system. There's only one person that actually like gets that reward every 10 minutes. Well, there's also transaction fees and stuff, but essentially like you get a little bit of Bitcoin. You can join what's called a mining pool, and if you have like 1,000 people in your mining pool and one of them gets the reward, then it's kind of split amongst everyone. And this is intended also to like maintain a sort of steady supply of Bitcoin, because they like introduce it at a knowable rate so that there's no inflation possible. So mining is kind of like the doling out of Bitcoins at a kind of a known mathematical rate. This is a nice diagram of that happening. So everyone's kind of contributing to adding to the blockchain. It's just a chain of information of who has what money. People like to complicate it, but it's like a big Excel spreadsheet that happens to be cryptographically secure and is like many, many gigabytes big at this point. And then the other thing that really kind of inspired the project was the, and I mean this from a critical perspective, of course, the election of Donald Trump, because I think what he kind of demonstrated for everyone was that the internet is not what it's supposed to be. It's not this liberatory force, but rather something that was kind of rather easily usurped by someone counter-revolutionary who kind of like outplayed us, I guess. And so, yeah, we were kind of like, I thought we were going to win because we had liked and shared all of the right articles, and it turned out that didn't really have any effect. And so enter BailBlock. This is a piece of software that is modeled after SETI at home, in the sense that it's distributed. Everyone's kind of invited to click to download the software and participate in this kind of ad hoc supercomputer. But rather than it being like a supercomputer combing through data from the stars, it's solving these kind of ridiculous math equations to earn cryptocurrency as a reward for mining. And we didn't use Bitcoin, but I chose rather to use Monero, which is another currency, because it's ASIC resistant. So one of the things that happened during the whole like Bitcoin mining bonanza is that it started off being software that you run on the CPU of your computer, because it's like solving these transactions, and there's this whole like other thing involved because they have to slow down the rate at which people solve the transactions, and so they make it like harder and harder and harder. But and then people found out that they could do that hashing algorithm, the like solving the problem on their GPU, the graphics card, at a way faster rate than the CPU. And so people wrote software for that. And then it's like, if you were using just a regular computer, you had basically no chance of earning Bitcoin, because people with GPUs were like, tearing through the blockchain. And then someone figured out that you could create a computer called an ASIC, which is an application-specific integrated circuit that has like, it's a computer with the sole task of doing one thing, and in this case, that one thing is mining Bitcoin. And that outperformed GPUs by like 100 times. And so it became this thing where like normal people can't mine Bitcoin because you have to have access to this kind of capital, these ASIC miners that are then like, stored on big shelves in these kind of like massive mining factories. So Monero is one of these currencies that's designed to be resistant to that because the algorithm kind of like, let's say, is equally as fast on consumer level hardware. And I knew that the audience was going to be people with MacBooks and stuff like me. So the idea was simple. It was like, download this software. It mines cryptocurrency in the background of your everyday computing. It uses about as many resources as watching like a YouTube video. And then all of the mining rewards that go back to a wallet, which I controlled, I would then sell for US dollars and use that to bail people out of jail. And this was done, partially also, this is an image of it running in the system tray. And this is from the first check that we cut to our partners at the Bronx Freedom Fund, which I think was like 5 weeks later, for $3,333.77, which is a very auspicious number. I like that. And at the peak, it had like 3,000 people using it or something. And so together, the hashing rate was actually quite high. I think we ended up raising like, after that it kind of petered off, and we raised like maybe 15 grand or something, and got a lot of people out of jail. And the other thing is that with bail, it's revolving. So, as I said, if you show up for your court date, the money comes back. And so theoretically 15,000 can, if the average bail is something like $900, can get a lot more than 16 people out of jail, but can continue to get more and more people. But I think that the work that the project did was much more in the kind of like rhetorical dimension of waving this carrot in front of the press about this kind of neat trick, and then being able to speak about the prison industrial complex and the kinds of like currency mining operations that are already happening, like on low income communities of color, for example, where the state extracts value from them and places them in jail. It was also like selling crypto for US dollars. I was really worried the IRS was going to come after me, because I was just like, I don't know, I'm going to go for it. But you have to, like find a buyer, and then like, you got to basically go from Monero to Bitcoin to US dollars. And like, you have to have someone who's ready to do a direct deposit and stuff. And this is the same. Oh yeah. And so I guess some of the kind of and then what that I wanted to talk about was like cryptocurrency, is kind of, in my mind, has been like entirely usurped or mostly usurped by libertarian types, and it's very profit oriented and kind of like anarcho-capitalistic. And to me, this is like it's not revolutionary in the way that they like to talk about it. It's just kind of the same cast of characters benefiting from capital. And what sort of goes unaddressed is the underlying problem of capital, which is that existing capital creates more capital accumulation, and so on and so on. And this could have been addressed by the software, but has yet to be addressed. And so I've been thinking a lot about the kind of unionization efforts and strikes that are happening in the U.S. And strikes are, kind of a form of technology that responds to a particular context. And there are many types of them. There's like, I have a list of them here, like work to rule, which is also called malicious compliance, which is like when you go to work and you follow the rules so much that you basically grind to a halt. Or a wildcat strike, which is like a kind of strike where it's not officially sanctioned by the union, because maybe the union can't do it legally, and so it's individual members take it upon themselves to take action. A sick out, when the members, just stay home, they take their sick days, and they can kind of coordinate this to have a maximum effect on their employer. And all the way down to like general strikes, where it's like everyone, regardless of industry, kind of comes together to strike, because like I think workers have exactly one power, and that's to withhold their labor. And so this is what we are able to do, what happens. And in thinking about what cryptocurrency could do in this vein, is like, rather than this kind of like pushing values around, we can leverage some of these smart contract systems to be like, rather than if crypto cat number 1 breeds with crypto cat number 2, then crypto cat number 3 has these properties. You could very just as easily write conditional logic into the chain that says, if the people, if our demands have not been met, then no transactions should occur. Or like, do some simple math and find out, are cis men being paid more for the same job because it's all there on the blockchain? If so, no transactions shall occur. And so I think there's a lot of potential, very unharnessed potential, that I would like for more people to be thinking about. And I think that there's some credence to this idea of like, leftists should be involved in this thing that is being taken over by our adversaries, because we can like literally take part in writing these sorts of codes that rely on just a 51% majority. And of course, this becomes super complicated because of the way that mining and staking is centralized. But it doesn't have to be on an existing chain. So just some thoughts for moving forward. And I think that's all I will say until we move on to the conversational point of this evening. So thank you for listening.